everybody. So, today's topic is going to be about people pleasing. I feel like all of us, a lot of us actually, struggle with some sort of people pleasing. And a lot of it comes from, not wanting to upset others. And also, it's a mixture of things. It's a bit complex. Some of us want to be fit in, and some of us want to not upset others, And almost every single person that I've talked with struggles with some sort of people pleasing, and sometimes I think to myself, like, where does it come from? How do we, stop it, or should we stop it? Should we completely get rid of people pleasing? Some of these questions, they come up a lot whenever I'm like thinking about this, right? And, I feel like there's a misconception that, only women or only men struggle with this, but in reality, it's a societal thing. All of us, we struggle with this at least, in one aspect of our life, whether it's friendships, work, or even just going out into the world whenever we leave our house, right? And, sometimes this shows up in our romantic relationships. Of course, in our platonic as well, but my focus is going to be about the romantic ones. And why does this happen, Well, there's three key things. Biologically, we want to fit in. It's just the nature of being human, All of us, we want to be accepted, we want to be loved, and, well, doing that means to fit in. And also, interestingly enough, the movies that we grew up with watching, like Disney, like one of my favorite ones was The Little Mermaid growing up, how she like meets her prince and, happily ever after. Yeah, well, Disney ruined our idea of love. Period. Just the expectations that, happily ever after, or the one, or this person completes me, I'm not whole unless they're in my life type of concept is fed to us not when we were adults actually, but when we were children. And I'd like to go more into detail about that. And also, how do we stop people pleasing? Well, we have to choose ourselves. We have to choose ourselves regardless of the situation. And I'm gonna go in more into depth in what it looks like to do that, right? So, to go first into my first topic, right? Biologically, we want to fit in, It starts as kids, we want to please our parents, because obviously it's a survival, Being able to survive means being able to, have the acceptance, have the love from our parents, because as babies, we can't meet our own needs. And so what happens is, obviously we have to do what it takes. But the thing is, most of us didn't grow up with a great household. A lot of us were either traumatized or, something happened along the way. And so at a certain point in our life, we learned to sacrifice our needs, right? And also, just in general, it's not that people pleasing is bad. Of course, you need like a little bit of it, because the truth is we cannot do life alone. We need people, we need a community, we need people to help guide us, right? And also, we can't heal our wounds without others, right? Because, according to the Psychology Today for the We All Want to Fit In article, the writer, she says, the need for acceptance is a basic human instinct. Although some value it more than others, we all want to fit in, to belong. In order to achieve that, we must present slightly different versions of who we are depending on the environment and whose company we are in. So do you notice, like, sometimes, maybe with this friend, you might be different, and then this friend's different, right? Because that's just natural human nature, right? And also, to go into the next topic, right? Oh, God. Disney. Happily ever does not exist. We are all flawed humans. Of course, we should not tolerate abuse or disrespect. But let's say, like, the average human being, we are flawed. We all have our own, flaws and strengths and weaknesses. And also, like, a lot of people, because they grew up with Disney, they want a partner so desperately bad that they're willing to do anything. Maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, that's what's going to happen, is that they end up self-sacrificing themselves in order to be chosen. And the interesting thing is, so I found in a magazine article, it's about how Walt Disney ruined our lives. It's a bit dramatic of a title, but according to the author Robert Epstein, many of the original stories that Disney bases themselves off is actually very brutal. For example, he includes the example of The Little Mermaid, where Ariel, our main character that we know and love, she throws herself into the sea and dissolves into sea foam. So, interestingly enough, not as romantic as we remember, right? Yeah, because, Disney movies, I don't think Walt Disney meant to, have that much of a cultural, phenomenon, but the truth is it is a cultural phenomenon, right? And so we have a very unrealistic, and also now with social media and also things like that, and movies and different movies, it definitely kind of I guess muddles our image and perception of what being chosen and what love looks like, right? And so I will say though, right, choosing yourself is probably one of the most difficult things to do, because a lot of us, we grew up without fathers. I myself also grew up without a father growing up, but then I realized that it was not just a me thing, right? Many people that I've talked with, whether their father's physically there or not, their father's not emotionally there, right? And Fox News did an article about this one too, is about America's crisis is a lack of fathers, because we live in a fatherless nation. That is what we struggle with, wanting to be chosen by our fathers. It doesn't matter, son or daughter, we want our father to choose us. And what do? Well, we people please. We're trying to reconnect and heal that wound that maybe we don't remember about, and whether that's going to show up in our work or our friendships or romantic, right? And, according to the article, approximately 80% of the single parent homes are led by single mothers. And so that means nearly 25% of our youth is actually growing out without a father in the home. And even those that grew up with a father, sometimes their father's not physically there. Maybe they're always working, or just not really interacting with their children, right? And then sometimes a love addict, right? Love addict is actually a real thing. Harvard did a study on this too, about how it's kind of similar to whenever you're love struck, it's very similar to how fruit flies interact. It's very interesting. That article is so interesting. But yeah, it's a complex situation. So being chosen can have both its benefits and cons, but overall, the most important thing is you need to choose you, right? So what do you need to do to feel chosen? That's the question I'm gonna leave it on. But thank you guys for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye.